So I've got a problem with the advice people give out when it comes to writing hateable villains, because I've never found any of it all that useful. Look at Dolores Umbridge, for example. She's wonderfully hateable. People say, well, it's because she's a sadistic narcissist, like when she gets Harry to mutilate himself doing his lines. And so are other hateable villains like Commodus from Gladiator. Therefore, make your villain sadistic. That's the trick to hateability. Here's a Reddit post I found telling you exactly this. But if you stop and think about that one for more than 5 seconds, you'll realise that's actually kind of terrible advice, because you have characters like Denethor from Return of the King, right? That tomato-munching bastard. He's about on par with Umbridge in terms of hateability, only he's not sadistic. By all means, he's awful in other ways. He's insecure, power-hungry, and let's not forget he's probably not winning any Father of the Year awards.
You wish now that our places had been exchanged, that I had died and Boromir had lived.
Yes. I wish that.
You bastard!
Here's my gripe. There is so much advice floating around the internet on how to write hateable villains, and in my mind it looks much like this graphic on screen. The common tips I hear being thrown around are give them no redeeming traits, they must have no charisma, have them commit evil deeds, give them plenty of negative traits like no integrity, selfishness, a short temper, and all that good stuff. And on its own, it is good stuff. But when you collate it all, it doesn't actually build towards a coherent philosophy. When I slot this all together, like Walter White putting together his broken plate, it's as if there's a massive piece of this puzzle missing. And that isn't just some random hunch of mine, you can tell it for a fact, because if you apply all of this advice, that's no guarantee of success. I'd argue Anton from No Country for Old Men has all 4 of these most commonly recommended traits, yet he's not terribly hateable. Isn't that interesting? The truth is, I've been sitting on this video for years, and I do mean years, because this issue has stumped me for that long. But I'm making it now because recently the answer struck me while watching, of all movies, The Mummy with Brendan Fraser. Look at the mummy himself. He kills people willy-nilly, sucking the life out of explorers who, while not the nicest of people, certainly don't deserve death. He kidnaps the protagonist's love interest to kill her in a dark ritual. He wants to conquer the world as well. Classic Dark Lord activities. Meanwhile, his sidekick Benny is just a regular guy. No powers, nothing. He never actually kills anyone. But if you've ever seen The Mummy, my god, is Benny substantially more hateable than the mummy itself.
Run, Benny, run! Get inside! Get inside! Don't you close that door! Don't you close that door!
The guy is an absolute sleaze. He's selfish, he's a coward, he betrays everyone around him constantly, a real assortment of negative traits.
Think of my children.
You don't have any children.
Someday I might.
Shut up.
And this is where it gets even more interesting, because what struck me is, hold on, this is the same pattern as Harry Potter. Benny is far more hateable than the mummy. Umbridge is far more hateable than Voldemort, and the trend doesn't stop there. Percy in the Green Mile, way more hateable than Wild Bill, who literally murdered some kids, for Christ's sake. Denethor, the incompetent king, is way more hateable than Sauron. Joffrey, literally millions of times more detestable than the Night King himself. And the Night King's goal, may I remind you, is to kill everyone in Westeros. What is this? Okay, this is getting fascinating now. Why are the minor villains usually the most hateable ones? So this had me on a different track of thought. Clearly it's because they're all suck-ups, right? They lack integrity by selling out to the main villain. But no, hold on, that doesn't make any sense, because Percy categorically hates Wild Bill, and Joffrey and the Night King, I'm not sure either was ever aware of the other's existence. This led to one inescapable conclusion. There's something deeper going on, something beyond mere character traits like being jealous or sadistic, which is why the prevailing strategy of just giving the villains certain traits has been unreliable. One thing's for sure, it's when a villain is close to home, more human, that's when our hatred really kicks up a notch. This might lead us to think, well, we've met Umbridges in our daily lives, those entitled Karen types who get on everyone's children's nerves. And we've known kids who are spoiled, sadistic monsters like Joffrey, who are often raised by those Umbridge-like Karens. I've heard this idea before, that merely reminding us of people we've hated in real life is enough to make us hate them. If you ask me, that argument, if true, only explains a tiny fragment of the larger truth. I can tell you that I personally had a very lucky childhood, where I never had any nasty experiences with any Karen types at all, and my day was never spoiled by one. Yet, as a kid, when I saw Umbridge on screen, I hated the hell out of her, along with everyone else. The lived experience argument has always fallen a little bit flat for me, but what I do think is at least a more interesting argument is what Carl Jung has to say about hatred. A man's hatred is always concentrated upon that which makes him conscious of his bad qualities. It's the idea that in real life, we will hate another person usually because they represent a part of ourselves that we hate, and often this is an issue with ourselves we don't acknowledge on a conscious level. If this is true, how could we possibly project ourselves onto the mummy? The man is an uncomplicated archetype, there's no nuance to him, but projecting onto Benny, a far more real person, that's a heck of a lot easier. A part of us might hate Benny because he's unconsciously reminding us of our own potential for cowardice and betrayal, so in hating him, it feels therapeutic, as if we're excising that part of ourselves that we'd rather not have. Like most of Jung's ideas, it's a really interesting one worth grappling with, and I think what we can do to clear this all up is recognise that there are two distinct villain types, one of which is reliably more hateable than the other. The first is the external threat existing beyond society. Voldemort is this, Sauron is this, so is the Joker, Hannibal and Anton Chigurh. They are blatantly villains to be killed or otherwise locked up. On that, every last person on the side of good agrees. If they disagree, if they think, hey, Voldemort's actually got a great muggle policy, I might be a Death Eater, or hey, the Joker sure does know how to make people laugh, I want to be a goon of his, those people are therefore a villain of a sort themselves. That's the first type of villain. We'll call them the monster. But then you have the second type. These are the villains existing within society. For lack of a better term, we'll call this villain type the citizen. Villains of this type are Percy from the Green Mile, Denethor, Umbridge, the businessman from Train to Busan, and if you ever saw that movie, you'll know just how hateable that dude was. Or Joffrey. Don't let the word citizen fool you. They can be in a leadership position, it's just in some way this villain must be a member of society. Someone can be following or allied to this person, yet not necessarily be a villain. Case in point, Joffrey has plenty of people working for him, but only some of them are villains themselves. You will find the moment you have your villain leap over the line from being mere monster to being a citizen, it is suddenly way, and I mean way, easier to make people hate their guts. Like, this is it. This right here is the missing piece of the hateable villain formula. Look at the Predator. He's very spooky, quite scary. But do we ever hate the Predator? No, not even in the slightest, despite the fact he's actively killing the characters we all quite like. Even Voldemort, the dude's a mass murdering terrorist. But do we hate him? Not terribly. My theory as to why is because our brains are wired in a certain way. If a threat is external, be it Sauron or Grendel or xenomorphs or even a literal force of nature like a tidal wave, the nuances of their motivations and internal complexities are kind of irrelevant. All that matters is the fact they pose a threat. So all on the side of good agree they must be dealt with, and they can be dealt with in purely physical ways. Throw the ring into the volcano, arm the turrets, give this man a shield, or
Bring up the holy hand grenade!
like that sort of stuff. Don't get me wrong, monster villains can be perfectly nuanced, they can be very complex. Hannibal, for example, the dude is trapped inside a prison cell and could do nothing more than talk. Yet his character is so nuanced, scenes of pure dialogue with him are nothing short of riveting. But in most cases, the monster villain can be simplified in the hero's minds into a very simple proxy of who they actually are, because we just need to physically defeat them. Who cares what's going on inside the mummy's mind? Just blow the guy up already. Who cares what motivates Voldemort? Just destroy the Horcruxes and everything will be fine. In fact, in the films, I'm fairly sure it's never said what his grand plan for the world is once he takes over, or even why he wants to. That's how little the complexities of Voldemort's character mattered to that story. But even then, with all that said, I still don't think we're going deep enough here. We've identified an interesting pattern, true, but why is this the pattern? Well, other than Jung's take on hatred and the familiarity argument where we've met these sorts of people in our lives, I think there's a lot more to it. To put us on the right track, I don't think it's a coincidence that usually it's the citizen villains who have the most satisfying death scenes. Not just because this much hated character is now defeated, Lord knows how much people love Joffrey's death, and that one came from totally out of nowhere.
Look, Pim, I know it's our job to help this guy and everything, but I think this guy's a lost cause.
Citizen villains generally, emphasis on generally, have more cathartic defeats because they have far more negative traits than monster villains. And those very hypocrisies or weaknesses are the things that come back to bite them, giving their defeat a touch of ironic justice. This could be Benny caving into greed and going back for even more gold in the Mummy, that slowing him down enough that he never escapes, causing him to die in a way that, while technically PG, still gave me nightmares as a kid. Or Dolores Umbridge, whose main thing is just imposing her will on other people and enjoying that tremendously, such as mutilating Harry when he does the lines saying, "I will not tell lies." Not because she actually cares about Harry lying or anything, but because he openly disagreed with her in class.
What use is that? If we're going to be attacked, it won't be risk-free.
Students will raise their hands when they speak in my class.
For any good teacher, they'd welcome the questions and critical thinking from their students. The issue is she's a full-blown narcissist. She doesn't actually want students, she wants sheep who will mindlessly follow her. There is nothing she hates more than people challenging her.
According to you, Cedric Diggory dropped dead of his own accord.
Cedric Diggory's death was a tragic accident.
It was murder. Voldemort killed him. You must know that.
Enough!
Making it so very satisfying when the actions of her rampant narcissism, those lines she forces Harry to write, seals her downfall.
Do something! Tell them I mean no harm!
I'm sorry, Professor. I must not tell lies.
To be fair, what people say is true. Hateable villains really do benefit from having tons of negative traits around them. And if you can make one of those traits be the thing that causes their downfall, you're in the money. You're setting yourself up for a very satisfying villain death. I think the dynamic between monster and citizen villains can be surmised like so. A monster villain attacks society from the outside. A citizen villain attacks society from within. A monster villain doesn't actually need any character flaws. They can be as simple as a literal force of nature. I mean, pray tell, what are the character flaws of Sauron? It's hard to tell because we hardly ever see the guy. A citizen villain, however, absolutely requires substantial character flaws, and whatever flaws you choose to give your citizen villain, like Commodus, they're ideally severe enough that if allowed to carry on, if their influence is allowed to spread as is currently in the story, that will inevitably lead to a worse society, or perhaps society's end. A monster is to be killed or otherwise locked up. On that, everyone agrees. But a citizen villain doesn't enjoy the same perception. People accept them as a member of their group, even if begrudgingly, allowing them to attack us in more immaterial ways. These ways are often abstract, like eroding core values of society, and normally it's a value that's needed in order to thwart the true main monster of the story. Perhaps it's the citizen villain's cowardice and endless betrayals that diminishes the trust in those we have around us, meaning when the monster villain comes, we're less able to trust our comrades and defend ourselves from them. But it doesn't have to be an abstract thing they're whittling away at. It could be something much more tangible, like Umbridge shutting down defense of the dark arts and undermining everyone's efforts to prepare for Voldemort's inevitable arrival. Or it could be being an incompetent king and leaving Westeros ruinously unprepared for imminent invasion from Daenerys from the east or the Night King from the north. Here this will be talking about societies in general, but it's very applicable to this video topic. As long as a society is united, it can accomplish nearly any goal. But the moment there's disharmony in the group, that ruins the group's ability to achieve anything, especially defending ourselves from external threats, causing us to hate the people creating this disharmony because it's toxic to the concept of society, and if not crushed, will lead to society's end. Whatever traits and motivations are necessary in order to achieve the larger goal of the group in your story, the citizen villain must embody the opposite. Else, by definition, they aren't a citizen villain, for they're helping the group instead of hindering them. The protagonist might still argue with them, that there would still be conflict, but they wouldn't be a true citizen villain. An example of this is Admiral Holdo from The Last Jedi. Not the best written character in the world, but she's not a true citizen villain because she shares the same goals as the rest of the rebellion and takes steps to help the group achieve them. I do think, though, there are some very interesting exceptions to this. Take Amon Goth from Schindler's List, a pretty darn hateable dude. For reasons I can't show on YouTube, else I'll be age-restricted, but while he is technically a citizen villain, technically, he's hateable in an entirely different sort of way. Usually it's the case that when the villain is ideologically defeated, the best sort of defeat you can aim for with a citizen villain, it disproves their way so no one else will ever follow in their footsteps, all instead following the better examples set by the protagonist. But the brutally depressing thing about Amon is even if he were defeated, that would achieve nothing. Because rather than being a one-off villain like Percy or Umbridge, he's merely a symptom of a system just as evil as he is. If he were killed, it wouldn't actually do anything. Society would be just as depraved for it, and that creates this hopeless hatred you feel towards him. It's a very unique approach to writing a despicable villain. But that film really is the rare exception to this, I think. It almost always, we hate the citizen villain because they're the ones spoiling society, not because they're a symptom of a society well beyond redemption. To bring this full circle, Denethor fits into this theory very snugly. He is easily the most hateable character in Lord of the Rings, right? And my god, does he have so many dislikable traits, like being power-hungry, deranged, a short temper, and so on. These traits certainly add to the hate. They catalyze it, I suppose, but they aren't the source. I'd argue the core of why we hate Denethor is because Sauron is invading. A clever, level-headed leader is exactly what Gondor needs in order to thwart Sauron's army, and Denethor is anything but. He's a tactical idiot, sending his cavalry to die pointlessly to retake a pile of rubble that even if retook, wouldn't be of any use. When the chips are down and the city is breached, does he bolster morale, rally the troops, and encourage them to defend the city? Nope. Instead, he says,
Abandon your post! Please live for your life!
Run this through a thought experiment, right? If Denethor were still an arsehole, but at the same time he was a great general and was deftly moving his troops around, very successfully thwarting Sauron, he would have been substantially less hateable. I don't like the prevailing writing advice around this topic because it is terribly inactionable. So to fix that, here's the closer looks blueprint for you to give a go. First, ask what are the larger goals the group needs to achieve in the story. In the Green Mile, for example, the larger goal of the guards is treating all inmates with respect and dignity. Okay, so then you ask, how can I make my citizen villain antagonistic towards that goal? You ask that, and suddenly you've created Percy, a sadistic arsehole who is the opposite of respectful. And then you want to ask, what actions can this villain take which sabotages their own group's goal? Such as killing a mouse because he wants to relish the screams of despair of Edward, or not wetting the sponge, or after Edward asks in his last moments about Mouseville, the place they said his mouse would go to after his execution.
There's no such place. That's just a fairy tale these guys told you to keep you quiet. Just thought you should know.
Now, Is it impossible to hate a monster villain? No, I never argue that. If I ever pretended you giving your character this one trait is guaranteed to make your villain hateable, that would be gobbledygook. But this is one more technique you can add to your writing toolkit, so give it a go the next time you want a hateable character. There are lots of other techniques and tools out there that people say are great for writing, but the truth is they're the opposite. For one, people say to use the various grammar checkers out there like Grammarly, and they're fine if you're writing emails or essays, but the moment you swap to fiction, like I found they really fall flat. For them, fiction is an afterthought, not a focus. And so as a writer, I've never found any of those checkers justified their price point. But that stance of mine's changed recently when I stumbled across Pro Writing Aid. I found them independently, I realised they are actually a very good tool for writing. So I reached out to them and they very kindly agreed to sponsor this video. And so I'll quickly explain why now I'm editing all of my fiction in Pro Writing Aid, because they've impressed me so much. While the other checkers will largely just correct basic typos or reorder a few clunkily written words, Pro Writing Aid also gives you an insight into the deeper issues from a storytelling point of view. Let me click on this and, apparently the first draft of my book only has 27 smell descriptors across the entire thing. I now know that come draft 2, I should use that sense a fair bit more if I want to set more vivid scenes. Not only does it give you a breakdown of all the words that you use too much, as well as helping you weed out repetitive sentence structure and passive voice, as Stephen King also says,
I believe the road to hell is paved with adverbs.
So Pro Writing Aid will tag any adverbs in your story to help you trim them, and what's a really considerate feature is they divide them by within dialogue and outside dialogue, because people speak with adverbs all the time, so you don't want to spoil the realism of your character's speech. No other spell checker I've seen has even considered that. What I've also found to be a really nifty feature is you can get critiques on your overall story. I plugged in the first chapter of a story I'm workshopping, and it basically said my character didn't have much depth to her, which the moment I read that I was like, yep, that's fair, I'll get right on it, because the POV character is so busy escaping something in scene 1, I forgot to actually show her character off. If you write fiction and you're looking for grammar software, Pro Writing Aid is the best one out there, I've checked, and if you click my link in the description or use my code CLOSER20, you'll get 20% off. And best of all, if you just want to dabble and see if it's right for you, they have a free version you can try out. Though I do recommend getting the full version because you know how it is, like the free one is bare bones. So to have all of the really useful features, you need to pay for it. However you want to try it, do click my link in the description and join me in using Pro Writing Aid today. Anyway, thanks for watching, keep writing, and I'll see you guys next time on The Closer Look.